All right. Hello. Good afternoon, and welcome to the State of the Wholesale Supply Chain Industry webinar. My name is Scott Luton. I'll be serving as your host today. We want to first thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We've received a few questions about how this report began, and we want to address those now. So in late 2018, we conducted a survey asking the National Association of Wholesalers members and distributors about key initiatives to support your organization's inventory and supply chain planning operations in 2019. So kind of forward looking. We then took that valuable input from the market, the industry, our clients, and others, and developed a report and this webinar, which will outline what leading edge companies are doing to compete in today's, as we all know, ultra competitive landscape. We'll also offer some tips on how to tweak your inventory optimization operations to ensure that you thrive in 2019. Not just execute, but thrive. This report builds off of the inaugural 2018 State of Wholesale Supply Chain Industry report, which was very well received last year. And for this year's version, we asked many of the same questions as we did last year in order to provide a good year-over-year comparison to show the evolution of the industry and how technology is shaping business practices. But first things first, we've got two wonderful guests here today. Our mission today is to empower you with information that makes your job easier. And while you'll notice that this webinar is hosted by Blue Ridge, this isn't a technology commercial. It won't be a technology commercial at all. That's not what we do here. With our two guests, we'll be tackling the conversation from two very different but very important viewpoints. Blue Ridge represents the science or technology of inventory optimization, and artofbuying.net represents the art or the skilled people component of inventory investing. And I represent the voice of the survey respondents. Again, my name is Scott Luton. I'll be your host for today's webinar. I've had the opportunity to spend the last 15 years in the end-to-end supply chain industry. I currently serve as Executive Vice President of Apex Atlanta and serve as chair of the 2019 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards Planning Committee. Today, I spend the majority of my time as a managing partner for Talent Stream, helping great companies get great people, especially in the engineering, the manufacturing, and the supply chain space. We also produce Supply Chain Now Radio to spotlight the best in all things supply chain. We're going to continue that trend today for sure. Joining me today is the CEO of Blue Ridge, Jim Burns. Jim is the CEO here of Blue Ridge, where he brings a proven track record in growing profitable application and consulting businesses. Prior to Blue Ridge, Jim spent more than 11 years at Infor, where he held multiple executive positions, including SVP of Wholesale Distribution and EVP of Global Consulting Services. He previously ran the U.S. operations of Ability as president of the supply chain management solution of this supply chain management solutions provider. Jim has also served as the Chief Operations Officer of Impact Innovations Group, a consulting services company focused on delivery chain management. Jim, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Scott.
Thank
you, everybody, for participating. Really appreciate it.
Glad you're here. We look forward to your perspective and expertise. Also joining us today is Dan Craddock, Managing Director for Catalyst. Dan serves the global inventory community at an all-new level with breakthrough education, analytics, and guidance. His mission, leading a journey to unrivaled inventory results, and his vision, turning buying departments into savvy inventory investment teams. Hello, Dan. Good afternoon.
Thanks, Scott. Hey, I hope my wife was listening because that sounded pretty good. If I can just add a point or two, most importantly, I love our profession. I was a buyer when I got out of college, and I think, like most, had no idea what that was going to mean. But I've stayed in our field, since then. And like you said, what I love doing now is really making the inventory position, a career destination, because it wasn't always that way. We all think around the table here that it's maybe the most important role in a wholesale company when you think of the inventory people are managing. So in addition to that, it's creating community amongst inventory professionals, which is always highly needed, and we'll share during this talk.
Absolutely. Lots of passion in the room. So to our listeners, you're in good hands. So moving forward, let's talk about how we conducted the survey. So again, in order to better analyze the current state of the wholesale supply chain industry and understand its biggest challenges, we surveyed more than 150 NAW Smart Brief readers on the challenges they are facing in 2019, with respondents including chief executive officers, chief operating officers, presidents, managers, and sales managers. The results really encompass the thinking of a variety of top executives working in different parts of the end-to-end supply chain sector. The survey consisted of 15 questions that helped us compile the following data and report. So we're going to jump right in. We're good at that. The key findings for this year's report, and we're going to get Jim and Dan to weigh in here in just a second, but the key findings for this year's report include, first, the challenge of managing slow or low selling items remains one of the biggest pain points for wholesale suppliers. Many don't have systems in place that are able to handle analyzing the data needed to make improvements. Two, the industry continues to lag behind others in adopting new approaches to managing data and other information, such as machine learning. Thirdly, despite having inventory turns and profit as top metrics, many in the industry continue to struggle with improving these. And then lastly, current solutions and tools, unfortunately, aren't helping wholesale suppliers achieve their goals. All right, so Jim, if you kick things off for us here, when you see these key findings, what immediately comes to mind?
Well, when you look at these, two things come to mind. Excuse me. One is the fact that a lot of things have changed externally to our wholesale distributors. Very little has changed internally with our wholesale distributor market. There is a lot more competition in the market out there. There are channels that are available to customers that were never available before. And it really is added to the complexity that our customers or our wholesale distributors are dealing with. And this really boils down to being able to accurately predict demand. And as we go through the data today, you'll see that the companies that have invested in people, process, and tools are thriving in this environment. And those that have not done that are in for some real challenges going forward. Some of the items on here have been solved before, and you really have to think about why these can't be solved today, because a number of these things that are mentioned here are kind of table stakes.
Great point. And Jim, to your point, a lot of this is not new challenges. They've been ongoing challenges that never have gotten fully addressed. Would you agree?
I would agree. And it's the external challenges are the ones that people really need to be mindful of and start addressing and getting outside the four walls of their warehouse.
Terrific. So let's bring in Dan Craddock again with Catalyst. Dan, what's your takeaway on some of these key findings?
Well, to build on what Jim said, first, three words to me, guys, hit me right away on this slide. And that's improving inventory profit. I think everything goes under that. What's really interesting to me is if I'm like a buyer or inventory analyst in a wholesale company today, I'm tuning in because I'm curious as to what my leadership and all the leaders, how they responded to this survey. I want to know how seriously they take inventory. Because as we've learned over the years and really the decades, wholesale companies started by great sales-oriented people, right? Relationship sales, marketing-oriented people. And they try to fix problems by strengthening sales and so forth. It's the companies that recognize that selling generates revenue, but buying right generates profit. They're the ones that are going to make it through these coming years because of everything going on. So a couple of these examples to me are terrific. The slow-moving items. That's a burden on your income statement and on your system if your system is not up to speed. What I wonder is, do executives realize exactly what that burden is? And through this, I always love to ask questions. To me, there's like 20 key questions that leaders should ask all the time in inventory. And one of them is even, what's my average forecast right now versus 10 years ago? Let's say it was 20 per period 10 years ago, and then it came down to 11, and then it came down to 6. As that's happening, do they know how that impacts everything? Like, That drives deviation up, that drives safety stock up, that drives expenses up. And what's that do to the profit picture? With the right analytics and tools, you can see that and then take action. But I think from respondents, a lot of them just aren't sure what that even means or what it's doing to them.
Great perspective there, Dan. So quick question before we move on to the next, to Jim and to Dan. Would you say that today effective and successful forecasting is most important than it's ever been before?
Absolutely. If you look at those, and I keep repeating myself, but the external factors, and we'll talk about some of the competition that these companies are facing, and it kind of leads into the next slide we're going to go through. But look, there are alternatives out there today that were never there before. And if you don't have the right materials in the right location, you're at risk. And we just have to get better at it in order to compete.
Sure. And there's data at our fingertips that more than we've ever had before as well. Dan, any?
Yeah. So demand forecasting is always the foundation and always will be the foundation. But I think a mistake some companies make is they think they just need a demand forecasting solution or algorithm, and that's not the case. They need a full inventory solution with forecasting again as the foundation. But it's that combination that's the key.
Yeah, you need a full baseball team, not just a third baseman and a pitcher. You need
like
the whole solution. Okay, good. So let's move on to the top challenges that our data, the top challenges that suppliers say they'll face in the short term. Insights from the comprehensive research on our end here. So first off, inventory management continues to be a multifaceted topic for supply chain managers, particularly when it comes to meeting demand. And then another interesting point here, of those surveyed, 75% said the increasing volatility of demand and the lack of internal processes and tools, that was their biggest challenge. That's a whopping percentage there. That was closely followed by 72% citing complex patterns of customer demand and long lead times as key challenges in the short term. So Jim, let's start off with you and your response to some of these findings here. When you see this list of top challenges that wholesalers are facing right now, what comes to mind?
Well, look, not much has changed year over year. And it really boils down to the last two items on the list, the increasing volatility and as well as the complex patterns of customer demand. When you think about this volatility and the competition and the external forces and the economics that I alluded to earlier, there is this increasing B2C mentality that has come into the B2B space. And, if I can't get it in a day today or tomorrow, I'm going to go find it elsewhere. And customer loyalty, which is the competition, it's under attack. That doesn't exist like it existed in the past. So understanding these demand patterns and analyzing that information is really critical. And then the complexity of the patterns is you have demand signals from multiple sources, and the number of customers, still go to market with direct sales force. They have phones, they have e-commerce. They've partnered with others to get their products out there in the marketplace. And being able to see those demand patterns from those different channels and being able to supply that properly all boils down to the challenges everyone's facing around demand. And that's a common theme we're going to talk a lot about today.
Absolutely. And Dan, why don't you weigh in on your thoughts here?
Well, Jim hit the good news is, as he pointed out, they recognize the demand issue. To me, what's scary on this slide is look how many companies are not worried about these other pieces, like the majority, not worried enough about these other pieces. And I think it comes back to a bit of an education issue. We like to see leaders of all of these companies kind of increase the overall inventory IQ. So let's hit this. Long lead times. Okay, we all know lead times are getting longer. We track it across industries. We watch it. As it happens, a longer lead time, if you're calculating safety stocks correctly, drives safety stock up, drives expenses up. Do people realize what that's doing and how it's impacting their business? In addition, a couple of the stress points that are really commonly out there are when the item's new, when the item's on any kind of event or promotion. And most companies don't handle that stuff very well. That ought to be a big concern for them, because as they're trying to hit numbers, they end up throwing dollars across the whole inventory when they could just make these areas stronger with the right processes and solutions and just be so much more efficient. So those are a few thoughts.
Yeah, I like seeing the 2018 results stacked up against the 2019 results and some of the differences there. But overall, pretty consistent overall in terms of last year's perspective and this year's, right?
I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to talk about sales channels for today's wholesaler. So as we all know, there's a myriad of options and channels available today, and we'll probably be talking about a new channel this time next year. So what stands out to each of you in the survey data? And Jim, again, let's start with you.
Okay. The piece that jumps out at me is the e-commerce piece, and I would lump Amazon into that as well. We clearly are in this digital revolution, but we're seeing customers, wholesale distributors back away from Amazon, and that was a fairly large decrease year over year. And we're seeing customers continuing to invest in their own e-commerce capabilities. And Amazon still is a absolute giant out there, right? They're going to do $258 billion.
Wow.
49% of all retail sales or e-commerce sales are through Amazon. And a lot of the wholesale distributors are now going up against Amazon Business, which is growing at 20% per month as a business. So the wholesale distributors are embracing, their own solutions. They're leveraging third-party marketplaces, and they have control over the data. Scott, you made a point earlier in this conversation here about the data and controlling your own destiny, and that delivery mechanism will provide some interesting insights when it comes to figuring out that future demand and where it is. And it also brings with it a series of challenges that the wholesaler is responsible for, because they own that delivery mechanism. So it's all around the order promising, the increased availability, reducing the delivery time or shipping time out to the customers. There's returns management. How do I handle that and get it back in inventory and those sorts of things? So customers, wholesale distributors are embracing e-commerce and working through and making sure that it's a great experience for their customers, and trying to protect that channel is what this is telling me.
Because it has to be. It's table stakes these days for the e-commerce experience to be a positive and practical one.
Right. And you want to be able to analyze where people are going. We have people we've worked with that use their e-commerce website to identify where they have lost sales. That's something that would never show up if you didn't have an e-commerce channel. So there are lots of things to be gleaned from having e-commerce.
Absolutely. And Dan, I want to ask you about inventory optimization in a second, but real quick, what's any takeaway from this information here on the current sales channels?
Yeah, Scott, three things hit me right away. And one is hoping that companies realize, especially with today's analytics and tools, that it's so important to track all these different channels, knowing that you still don't have to inventory your products separately yet. But by tracking it and seeing what's going on, you can start to get a feel for things. And to me, it introduces what I believe is a key new number that people ought to track. This is part of that 20 questions thing. What is your inventory operating expense as a percentage of your revenue? It's a number I'd love to see every executive know. And that can range from an overall in some industries of like 1%, but even in a company where it's 1%, say a food service company, you get to some slower moving, unique items that can grow to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%. And if you try to too quickly go to some unique market or unique way of warehousing your products, you can really do some damage. I have seen companies try to get closer to markets by separating the warehousing they end up creating a bunch of slow moving items, not realizing the burden that puts on the safety stock and the expenses. And the final one for me is, and this has just always been big for me, I call it the inventory community in action. If I am one of the 80% not doing Amazon or another marketplace, I'm looking at those companies saying, how do I get connected to talk to them to learn what they've learned so far? I think it's so critical in our inventory world, especially across wholesalers, even across industries, that we get together and connect and learn from each other. There's a ton to learn there.
Yep. So Dan, specifically for the savvy inventory investor, how do you make sure your inventory is optimized across all channels?
You need to see the numbers. I'm a big Marcus Lemonis fan from the TV show The Prophet.
Yeah.
If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. And I think most people, they don't see their numbers, and they can't break it down by inventory sector to really see what's happening. Everybody has items where they're not making money and they don't see it clearly. There's a little bit of gross margin, but they don't see the expenses to see what's happening to the net margin. And I think that's something we need to get. Wholesalers in general aren't great at merchandising, but the info we have now and the stuff Jim talked about, all that becomes really valuable merchandising information.
Great point. And we're big fans of Marcus Lemonis and The Prophet. I just watched the last episode last night.
Best.
It's great. We can get them on Supply Chain Now Radio. All right. So Jim, any final thoughts before we move on to some trends, the next segment here?
No, the one thing that did jump out at me is the field sales. Looks like it's continuing to hang where it is, and I found that a little bit surprising. Don't know what to make of it. It's a small increase, but everything seems to be tracking from where it was prior to this.
Okay, very good. So moving right along, this year has seen its fair share of macroeconomic business disruptors, Brexit, of course, tariffs, et cetera. We wanted to see how these trends trickled down into your supply chain. So transportation and labor costs, of course, increased lead times due to transportation capacity, all were cited as some of the biggest trends in 2018. So Jim, when you look at these trends, where are wholesalers struggling?
Well, my first reaction to this is the woe is me slide, or don't be a victim slide. You read this list and you think, gee, I don't control any of these items. These are all out of my control. And I would disagree. I believe a lot of the things that are on here are under your control with the right process, tools, and people. And you do have a great ability to control your own destiny with regards to it. So you don't leave it to someone else to determine the fate of your business and how it moves forward. There's no reason why you should not be able to account, for example, on lead time variability and build that into your demand plan. There are abilities to be able to build out orders with the right levels to optimize and optimize your inventory replenishment, but at the same time take into account what those costs are with regards to transportation and how that fits in there. The whole thing about higher price increases and in the cost. Look, there are great ways to evaluate pre-buys and or forward buys, if you will, and the worst thing you can do is with a knee-jerk reaction, turn around and buy some inventory that you have no idea what the demand for that inventory is. And I shouldn't say no idea, that's a little harsh, but that you're using anecdotal information to be able to determine whether you take advantage of that or not. And a lot of times it's
uninformed buy.
Yeah, uninformed buy. It turns out to be overstock at some point down the road.
Dan, what are some of your thoughts here?
Yeah, so when I look at this slide, obviously we're circling around lead time a lot, right? And that's really important because most companies out there, everybody does something on the demand forecast side. Even if it's not the best thing, they're doing stuff, but they'll often just plug in a number for lead time, kind of shoot from the hip from the lead time side. And now that lead times are edging up, I think everyone's realizing, we need to know what these numbers are. We need to measure them. We already said that higher lead times cause higher safety stock. Now, if your lead time on a supplier goes from 20 days to 30, you don't actually sit on 10 days more inventory. That's not how it works. You're just buying earlier, but it does mean some higher safety stock. But here's the worst part. It's the fear factor. And I'm watching lead times across companies quite a bit right now. The fear factor is inventory pros, like I was years ago, we get a bit afraid of what's happening and we cushion. We cushion that lead time. That becomes extra safety stock. I hope every company out there is tracking this other number. What is 1 day of inventory worth to me? That's something everybody ought to know. And then I think, as Jim said, you kind of get down to, is this extra expense a cost of the product or an internal cost of doing business? And the ones that just see it as a cost of doing business, they're not going to be prepared and it's going to bite them. If you're transparent with your customers, you can really show what's happening and show that it's really a cost of the product, or else you're going to be in some trouble.
Great point there. Transparency with the customers kind of benefits all parties and lets us all make better decisions that saves everybody money and time and resources, right?
A reminder, our margins are super thin in wholesale. Our customers might not realize that. Our suppliers certainly don't appreciate that. And so we have to do everything in these areas to refine.
Very good. So moving forward, let's spend a little more time talking specifically about the transportation trends and challenges that we were able to identify. 63% of survey respondents modified their inventory strategies due to transportation costs. So Jim, let's talk about the impact to inventory optimization here.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a double whammy, right? If you go back and look at the customer loyalty element that I mentioned earlier, and then you take into account the the transportation costs, we're seeing an expansion of inventory levels in our customers, in the wholesale distribution customers out there in the market. They rise. The companies are changing their inventory strategies to offset these costs. They're buying more inventory less often, and there seems to be a lot of manual decisions that are made based on what the mechanical or the tools would tell you that you should buy. Suppliers have to be able to incorporate their transportation costs in their forecasting models. They have to be a lot more thoughtful before, on their ordering decisions. And if they are, then they can start to get their arms around higher returns on the investments they're making inside of their inventory.
Dan, what are some of your observations here?
Well, from a big picture, I'd say this pie needs to be 100%. So first we have to figure out how to get this to say 100% so that everybody takes this seriously enough. I think Jim made a few great points that I'll build on. One is, as we set a strategy for how we buy, with these transportation costs going up, Jim's right. We now need to see, should we go ahead and buy to a higher bracket? And if that's a challenge, do we piece together a few different vendors and do a pull truck type of situation? And what it really pushes, and I've seen some companies do, is, look, in the inventory group, we're not always great at being connected closely with, let's say, our warehouses and transportation. We always talk about some key roles, like a champion role within the inventory team. I've seen companies just in the past few months put dedicated people in place just to manage the whole lead time transportation piece. That's a link between their team and the transportation and warehousing team. That can pay huge dividends. Something we should have done all along, but now the pressure's on and we've got to do it.
So getting the different aspects of the end-to-end supply chain communicating and can bring a lot more knowledge and information and relevant data to the table, right, when we're making some of these big decisions.
That's right.
Right. Jim, were you going to weigh in there?
No, I think these costs, it's a matter of, look, you have to buy a container or a pallet or whatever it is you're going to buy. And you have to build up to a certain level with an understanding of lead times and transportation costs, and doing that in the most optimum way based on a good demand forecast is what's going to enable you to really take a bite out of the transportation costs and take control of it.
So woe is me is unacceptable, right?
Unacceptable.
We gotta put things in the headlock and
No,
make it
sir. They
happen.
come to me and here and say things I go, what? No, don't be a victim.
Don't be a victim. I like that. All right, so let's keep on trucking here and talk current day's supply chain on hand based on the wealth of data that we got from our respondents. So a great indicator of supply chain success, of course, is current days of supply on hand. And we all know this varies by industry, but what does this data tell us? And Jim, we'll continue the trend and start with you.
Okay, so look, inventory levels really haven't changed between 2018 and 2019 when we did this survey before. And we believe, based on the data, that wholesale distributors are carrying more inventory in 2019 to offset that uncertainty over demand. And they're holding more inventory no matter what area or concern within the company, right? So 60% of the wholesalers have more than 1 month of supply on hand. Again, that's similar to what we saw last year. But we do see a strategy where people are stockpiling products. It just signals that this is a group that continues to rely on gut feel when it comes to determining what their stocking levels are, and they're not leveraging some of the tools that are available and the processes and that are out there and available. The one thing that is really shocking as you look at the data, and we'll see some more of it here in a minute, is the fact that even though inventory levels are up from where they were before, fill rates are down. So the out of stocks have grown substantially between 2018 and 2019 out of the respondents. So yeah, we're carrying more inventory. We're not carrying the right inventory is what it's telling me.
Dan, what's it telling you?
Yeah, so to build on Jim's, we're slightly higher in terms of inventory. And to me, that's fear, somewhat true fear on the lead times going up and somewhat back to the unknown of what's happening. But I really want to make a push here. This question is here because it's one of the most popular questions. Wholesale companies ask it all the time. Honestly, the question drives me a little bit crazy because I think we need to get into a much smarter mode of decision, asking and questions. So let's hit it this way. A strong solution with a great process. Every item stands on its own, with a unique safety stock and lead time and all these different components. And what I love viewing is what's the overstock percentage of each item and then overstock percentage overall. That's a much better factor because you're relating your current inventory level to what it can be or should be. As you look at on-hand days, certainly it's going to vary by industry, but even within an industry, in someone's unique geography and item mix, it's going to be so different. It's hard to really compare, but you can compare a new number like the overstock percentage. So, I'd love to see us start to question deeper in that regard and get some of these new questions out there.
All right. Well, we're going to move right along here. We're going to talk more about carrying inventory. So from our data, companies are clearly carrying more inventory across industries and for several reasons. Stockouts, of course, are always bad news. No one likes it, and bad news for the retailers, bad news for the everyone across the supply chain, and certainly bad news for the customers. Some organizations are carrying additional inventory for long lead times, lack of internal processes and tools, a bevy of different reasons. Jim, what was most telling here from your perspective?
Well, our two villains are still in here: volatility of demand and the complex patterns of customer demands. And we've talked a lot about that. Two things actually really jumped off the page at me. One is the second item on here: lack of internal processes and tools. That is a direct connection back to the last two items on this chart. And it ties to demand. People that have not invested in processes and tools and people are going to continue to have problems with demand. The one bright spot on here, and it is encouraging because I don't want to paint every wholesale distributor with the same brush. There are people that are investing in processes and people and tools. But the number of people that are reaching outside their four walls, getting to the supplier and collaborating with the supplier, you can see a dramatic impact on what's going on with their business. So giving visibility to that demand, working with that supplier back on demand, just think of the downline ramifications on things like lead time variability. And some of the other things that we talked about earlier with regards to the supplier. So it's great to see that. That's one big improvement over what we saw last year. And that supplier collaboration is comforting to see. People are getting on board with it and taking advantage of it. We still have work to do on some of the basics in some areas and segments of wholesale distribution.
So decisions made upstream will certainly have a ripple effect downstream, right? Got to keep that in mind. And sometimes the bullwhip effect, which that when talk about volatility and complexity, it can give us more problems to solve. Dan, what about you? What are your key takeaways here?
Yeah, there's a lot happening on this slide, isn't there? So one of my favorite things, one of my favorite breakthroughs of the last several years is just when inventory pros realize that they have numerous inventory sectors. And here's the example. For years, we would hear a buyer or analyst say, I missed service by 2 points or by 1.5 points. And what do? They tend to then throw money trying to fill in that 2 points. They throw it at the entire inventory, but we don't miss across the board. We miss in certain sectors, but they're blind often to those sectors. And this slide is the start of those sectors. So then we want to question people and say, well, how did you perform on your long lead time items? How did you perform on your new items? Because we see consistently there are certain areas where they miss. Other examples, short order cycles. Buyers miss service on short order cycle lines. They think they're the ones they're always going to hit on, but they miss. So to me, this is the beginning of buyers realizing that they are inventory investors managing a really unique and complex investment portfolio. And if they will break that portfolio down and start to show numbers of service and inventory results based on all those sectors, they'll be delivering some great rewards to the company.
So getting more specific in these different areas rather than, as Jim mentioned, he didn't want to do paint with a broad brush.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
All right.
It's expensive to paint with a broad brush.
Amen. So moving right along, we asked respondents what percentage of demand that they could not fulfill from their inventory. And while lost sales due to stockouts is, of course, important, equally important is having too much inventory and creating a surplus. So you got to pick your poison because you're losing money either way for sure. So Jim, walk us through creating optimal inventory levels.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that if you look at the fact that we have increased inventory levels, but yet the missed sales of more than 4% grew from 19% in 2018 to 27% in 2019. And the net of it is, and it gets back to the earlier slide, the tooling and the processes are not sufficient to meet the demand. And I'll refer to a document that Gartner published back in November. It was some context around their latest sales supply chain planning system of record, blah, blah, blah. And it was, it came out in November, and it was a really interesting statistic that jumped out at me in the report, and that was the fact that 24% of all mid-market buyers, wholesalers, are coming from manual systems today. And that's an alarming number. And that manual system is an ERP, which gives you rudimentary inventory management capabilities, where it's then exported to Excel, where it's manipulated there. And again, trying to keep up with all of the changes in demand and analyzing all those channels. It's just impossible. The other piece of that report that I found equally staggering is the fact that 14% of the companies over $1 billion in revenue are still relying on a thin ERP when it comes to supply chain planning along with Excel. So if we want to fix the inventory problem, the stock out problem, we got to get back to looking at how we're predicting demand and put some tooling and some training in there to help people predict demand better.
Where would we be without our Excel spreadsheets, right? Gotta love it. All right. So Dan, why don't you weigh in here?
Yeah. So the difference last year from what we watched was lead time. That was the difference between the 2 years in terms of service. But look, let me redo this question, because today, using systems like a Blue Ridge, you can actually nail the exact service goal that you're after. I mean, nail it. And then the question becomes, where do you want to be, right? Because most people, they feel like the inventory is driving them. It should be in a position where you use the service level goal as a steering wheel and drive exactly what you can afford, what you want your image to be, and do it uniquely by categories and items, and go way beyond ABC rankings and use profit picture, as well. But that's where people can be and should be. And then it's a new set of questions for us.
Absolutely. Getting better and better and better, not just simply executing, but thriving, like we talked about on the front end of this webinar. All right, so we're going to talk about pain points. All of us have pain points, some more than others, depending on your particular industry. Our survey dove into what pain points companies experienced while trying to achieve their business goals. So when you look at all these pain points on this slide here in total, how can wholesalers start to address and conquer them, Jim?
There are a number of items on here that scream out to what we just saw out of the Gartner results. These first 3 items on here, slow movers, seasonal profile, product lifecycle forecasting, are all things that have been solved and available today from whomever, right? There are tools out there to do that. And it's disappointing to see them, quite frankly, at the top of the list. They should be things that are already under control, but you take these into account, you circle back to the demand and what's going on with inventory, it all makes sense. These are things that shouldn't be at the top of the list, and hopefully next year when we do this, we don't see them at the top of the list. But there are ways to attack these, and if that's truly the problem that you're facing, there are lots of people that can help.
Great point. Dan?
Yeah, so the order of these is not that surprising. And Jim made a great point. The key is you can't just throw software code at these problems. And that's why, trying to use ERP tools and so forth is just not going to do it. It's got to be that process and people development, with the tool. But you have so many opportunities here, because especially in the first couple, you have the chance to have not just great analytics, but then the artificial intelligence kick in when you realize you're reacting so consistently and so commonly, to each one of these. One of the favorite questions I like to ask is, what percentage of your items are seasonal? And then after a company puts an advanced tool in, they'll find that 3 times as many of those items are actually seasonal than they knew. Also brings the importance of the benchmarking and the community in action piece.
And what you allude to there is kind of the dangers of making those assumptions, right? We'll make assumptions because of anecdotal, something that Jim was talking about. But when you go out and get the data and really figure out what you're assuming is night and day.
These companies, their data is dying to tell them a story, and we want to work with them, typically to help tell that story. So yeah, great point, Scott.
Okay, so machine learning and artificial intelligence. These buzzwords are everywhere. In fact, I think it's illegal to have a supply chain conversation without mentioning those, and we'll throw blockchain in there too. But we asked the same question in 2018, and although the buzz is increasing, we're dialing in specifically on machine learning. The buzz is increasing, but the results may not be for everyone in terms of applying machine learning to their forecasting. So, Jim, let's start with you. How can wholesalers capitalize on the advancements in both machine learning and, let's include AIs in that as well?
Yeah, there are a number of areas that people can leverage data and information to create machine learning. If you take a look at things that are available, for example, in an HVAC environment, there's all sorts of weather information available. How does that impact your forecast, your demand for your products? Look at what that impact has been historically. Look what the future looks like. There are just so many things available, those demand signals that you have to capture and analyze that would enable you to take advantage of machine learning. It's whether it's weather, there's all sorts of competitive information that's available out there, item promotions that are going on, sale prices, customer demographics. There are so many demand signals. It's getting your arms around those, figuring out which ones are most important to you. It's not a matter of machine learning for machine learning's sake. There are a lot of trends and analysis that can be done to figure out, in fact, what that forward-looking demand for that product's going to be. This is all about how do we give you the ability to predict the future demand that's going to be required for that particular product.
Dan?
Yes, I'm just going to say this. This picture looks familiar from 30 years ago, which shows my age. But 30 years ago, this picture basically was saying companies that were using any type of advanced inventory management. And now that has changed really quite a bit. And now here we are with the artificial intelligence. And the same thing's going to happen over the years. It's going to stretch out because everyone needs it and will benefit from it.
It's inevitable, right? If we're not trying to take advantage of these progressive cutting edge technologies, that we're not getting out of our comfort zone enough, because they're here to help. We just got to figure out how they apply and how they can drive real return, which on my end, the blue section there, the light blue section, they've used it, but not sure of the value add. What's y'all's take on that?
Here's what's going to happen. It's just like when you give the tool to new buyers, the other colors are going to watch the orange. They're going to see their success, and they're going to rally around the orange.
I like that. Jim, any final comments before we kind of move into conclusion?
I agree with Dan, and the proof is in the pudding, and we need to get more people out there with positive results in order to drive greater adoption of machine learning.
So to our audience, be the orange. Be the orange. All right. So what we want to do is kind of reiterate the key findings that we found through this exhaustive research and study here. The key findings that we found that the data tells us is, number one, the challenge of managing slow or low selling items remains one of the biggest pain points for wholesale suppliers. Many don't have systems in place that are able to handle analyzing the data needed to make improvements. Two, big key finding, the industry continues to lag behind others in adopting new approaches to managing data and other information, such as what we were just talking about, machine learning. Three, despite having inventory turns and profit as top metrics, many in the industry continue to struggle with improving these areas in their business. And finally, one of the key findings here, current solutions and tools, again, unfortunately, aren't helping wholesale suppliers achieve their goals. So Jim, after taking in all this survey data, this wealth of data that we've assembled thanks to our participants as part of the study, what is the one thing that wholesalers and distributors should start doing today that they currently might not be doing?
Scott, there's a lot of information that we shared today, and there are a lot of different ways you could go. My recommendation is sit back, take an honest assessment of where you are today with regards to some of the items that we went through here today, and determine the 2 or 3 things you want to go focus on. You can't do it all. And if you're back in the ERP with a bolt-on Excel, let's not worry about machine learning. Get focused on some of the basics around seasonal profiles of products or slow movers, those sorts of things that are going to provide immense benefit to the business. So keep it simple, focus on the 2 or 3 things that are going to have the greatest impact on the business, and apply the people, process, and tools in order to drive those forward.
And as we all know, automating bad processes is still bad processes. It's just faster, more efficient bad processes.
You get exactly. You
Yeah.
get the wrong inventory, and you got more of the wrong stuff you're moving around.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Yep, not good. Dan, what are some of your takeaways on these key findings or in general?
Okay, Scott, you ready for this?
We're ready.
All right, so few key points. I go back to my 3 words: improving inventory profit. All right, top management needs to either feel the desire or the pain, and I don't care which. Whatever drives them is fine with me. Then, as they do this, they need to approach a solution, but not look at it as a software implementation. Don't look at it as software package number 8. They need to position this not as an operations tool, but as a financial revenue profit tool. Then put great people in place, especially a key champion. Make sure the solution you grab really focuses on great process and develops people, so critical. And then educate from the top down. Leaders get educated first, increase that inventory IQ. The rest of the company will thrive and feel that, and you'll do amazing things.
Love it, Dan. Love the passion in this room as well. And so what I heard there, improving, regardless how you do it, through people, process, technology, put inventory to work for you. Improving inventory profit is so critical to thriving in 2019, right?
That's right.
So that is going to bring our webinar to a close today. We want to thank our audience for attending and joining us. Hopefully y'all have gotten some good practical takeaway. We also want to thank all of our survey participants that gave us their insights and provided the data that where we could summarize and pull and present these key findings to you. I want to thank our guests today, Jim Burns, CEO of Blue Ridge. Jim, great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate everyone joining the webinar today, and we plan to do this again in 2020. So for all those that didn't participate in 19, that are on the conference here, on the call here, we'd like you to participate in 20.
Absolutely. And I also want to thank Dan Craddock, Managing Director for Catalyst, for joining us.
Everyone, go hug your buyers today. They might just be the key to your next amazing board meeting results.
Absolutely. Hug your buyers. They're doing good work, tough work, but a key to thriving in 2019 for sure. Again, thank you to our audience. To learn more about Blue Ridge Global, very simple. Go to blueridgeglobal.com. And of course, we'd welcome your participation in upcoming Supply Chain Now radio programming. You can learn more about that at supplychainnowradio.com. If you have questions, let us know how we can help. Send your questions to info@blueridgeglobal.com, and we'll do what we can to serve as resources for you, your teams, and your organizations. And with that, again, we're going to sign off from here, Atlanta, Georgia, the supply chain city. We look forward to you joining us for upcoming webinars from Blue Ridge Global in the months to come. Thanks, everybody.